Another thing I like to do is I like to check and make sure that it's actually on Facebook and that people can actually hear it. And also, this gives people the chance to log on and watch the stream. Oy. All right. Well, anyways, we'll just go ahead and get started. Hey, everybody. Welcome to mattnews.biz, where I talk about my opinions, thoughts, and beliefs that have been lovingly dubbed Matt News. If you're watching the live stream, whatever platform you are viewing on, feel free to ask any questions in the comments or to the chat section. And my guest and I will be sure to respond at the end of this episode. This is episode 24, and this is titled Beast of the Bible tonight. We have Daniel Cole Dodd. Daniel has been a pastor and a good friend of mine for a very long time, and now he is currently ministering in Redding, California with Bethel Church. Daniel Cole Dodd, welcome to Matt News.
Hey, man.
Hey.
How's it going?
Good, man. Good. So you're in Redding, California.
Yeah.
You're with Bethel.
Yeah.
And how's that?
That's kind of like.
So you're not.
So I went to school there, and I graduated from there, but I'm not on staff with them. And I go to church there. Well, I would be going to church, but we are not allowed to go to church right now. But that is what I would call my home church while we're here in Redding, California.
Okay. So how has, because I'm very curious about Bethel. I actually know a guy who graduated from Bethel, and he's our worship pastor now for our South Shore campus, Bruno.
Awesome. He went. I know Bruno.
Yeah.
I shouldn't say I know him. I know of him, but I didn't know he went to Bethel. That's cool.
Yeah, he went to Bethel, and we've talked a little bit about it, and we've talked a little bit about some of their beliefs and everything. So how has it been for you? Because you were actually my pastor for a few years at Midway Baptist Church.
Yeah.
And you went to Baptist schools and stuff like that. So how is it going from Baptistville to Bethel?
So, yeah, that's a long story, but I pretty much grew up Baptist. You know, 17 years old was when I got saved. I was going to a Baptist high school, and then I immediately went to Trinity Baptist College in Jacksonville after I got out of high school. I didn't really take it seriously. So then I came home and was in a Baptist church, went to another Baptist seminary in Brandon, Florida, Emmaus Baptist College. I got an associate's with them in theology, but I remember just my studies. I don't know, like I guess the main switch for me was just at the age of 30. By the time I had been a worship pastor, a youth pastor, and I was a senior pastor for an interim period, and then for like 4 months officially, and then I just laid everything down. Had a lot of darkness in my life, had a lot of sin going on in my life, and I chose to lay myself down on the altar, and it was. We don't have to get into all that because that's like a whole topic for the day. But that event really kind of, when I thought I hit rock bottom, I found the elevator button down even further, and I crashed, man. Like I lost. A lot of my friends turned their back on me. The church that I was at wanted pretty much nothing to do with me. I resigned from being a pastor there. You're probably one of the few people. I got a handful of people that actually would still talk to me. So it was a very painful time. And when I went through that time, my wife and I really had nowhere that really felt like home. Nobody really felt like were welcoming us. And we ended up in a charismatic circle. And I had been taught that anything related to charismatic was just wrong. You just don't even give it the time of day. But I didn't care about doctrine at the time. I cared about relationships. I needed people to be around me. And when I started building relationships and started hearing people's heart on things with my doctrinal background, with my theological background, I was able to start filling in the gaps of things that didn't make sense to me before. But now I have an open mind and stuff. So, I don't want to get too out there on this episode or whatever, but that was right. My whole confession, my whole laying my life down thing, it all revolved around the first time I actually heard the voice of God. And I was trained to know that you don't hear the voice of God. It's just not something that happens. But I know what I heard. I heard the voice of God. It scared the crap out of me. And I responded to that voice, and that led me down this path. And so, open mind, I'm walking down this path, and now 3 years into that, so at the age of 33, then I hear God speak to me again, and he tells me to come out here to California. And so I just wanted to be obedient, and it wasn't easy coming out here. And we had to sell our home and everything. And I guess all of that just really taught me to have an open mind with everything, and to not hate people for their beliefs, and not to just write things off, but just give people some leeway, I guess. And so that's how I ended up here. And I'll tell you, I don't agree with everything that Bethel says. I mean, you and I were talking earlier. You don't have to agree 100% with everything where you are. You know, you're mature enough as a Christian. You're mature enough to be able to chew up the meat, spit out the bones. Otherwise, if I go to a church only because I agree, or if I'm leading a church that only produces people that can be in 100% agreement with me, I'm not pastoring a church of people. I'm pastoring a church of cookie cutter robots that they fit the bill of whatever I want them to look like. And I don't think that's Jesus. That doesn't sound like Jesus at all.
Right. Yeah. Because I mean, Jesus even fought against his own disciples, and had to teach them, and had to reshift their whole focus, and because they're Jews with that Jewish mindset, and he was like, "Hey, you're on the right track. You just gotta, shift a couple things around." Yeah, because right now I'm going to a church that's, it feels almost half charismatic and half not charismatic. Like they still have that charismatic base, but it's just not full force charismatic. And I still don't know where I fall in. I don't feel like I'm charismatic at all, but I don't know. I've always felt open to that charismatic, lifestyle from early on, which is very weird, because I've gone to mostly Baptist churches outside of the one I currently go to now, the church I go to now.
Yeah, I would say, like, being out here, I've traveled the world in the past 2 years with Bethel. And so I've gone to, I think, 4 or 5 different countries, if I sit and think of them, count them up, but 3 different continents over 2 years. And so I've gotten to see how they do missions, and how they do, Bethel believes in healing. And I was raised to not believe in healing. And I'll give you a quick story. This is actually going to be on a documentary that was supposed to come out in March of this year, but because of COVID, it's been pushed back. But it's a documentary it's about healings with medical evidence as proof that healings took place. So, like, when you hear of healings where metal actually leaves the body and just disintegrates in the body, we wanted to not just talk about it in a testimony. There's actual medical proof. Like, here's the CAT scan before, here's the CAT scan after, that kind of thing. Yeah. And so I got interviewed for this documentary because I was in Lebanon last year, 2019, and I went to the border of Syria. And I actually have this on my Facebook. I put this video. I don't know if you've seen it. I went to the border of Syria, and we went to a refugee house that was Syrian refugees. And this boy had been paralyzed from like the waist down for like 6 years. Couldn't walk for 6 years. He hadn't eaten for like 6 weeks, and he was super skinny. His legs were like that big around. And we just started praying over him. We had a guy on our team that was there. It was 4 of us in the house, 3 Americans and a South African. And one of the guys on our team had been paralyzed from the waist down, and somebody prayed over him, and he got out of his chair and walked. It's like one of those things you only hear about as Southern Baptist, And so he's a friend of mine. He's still a good friend of mine today. His name is Joel. And he was there. We prayed over the boy, and we prayed for about 5 minutes, and the boy got up and walked. Like, this is a boy who doesn't speak any English. He's a Syrian refugee, doesn't even believe in Jesus. He believes there is a Messiah coming, but he doesn't believe Jesus was the Messiah. And so he just gets up and walks and totally changes. I mean, I was giving it a chance, like, I wasn't hard on the fact that I don't believe in healing. I was open to it. And that right there, for you to see it, you get to a point where you're like, I don't want to base the Bible on my experiences. I want to base my experiences on the Bible. And now I have an experience of healing. I've seen it happen. And this is just one story, because now it was like a domino effect after that. So I've seen one story of healing. Now this makes the Bible make sense in that area for me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, that's cool. I mean, I haven't personally seen a healing. You know that when my mom was,
Yeah.
had cancer and everything like that. Like, I mean, I prayed for it and I was super open to it. It just didn't happen.
Right.
But I'm not. A lot of people, when I tell my testimony about my mom, they're like, man, I don't know if I would have been able to keep my faith and everything like that. I'm like, well, why? Because my hope, my hope when I read the Bible, my hope is that the future resurrection.
Right.
And so I can't put it all on, God's gonna heal, because I believe God's sovereign. So God's gonna move however he wants to move, and God's gonna do whatever he wants to do. I don't know, because I've seen some stuff about Bethel, so I don't know if that's Bethel's beliefs, because I know that they believe in bringing heaven to earth
Right.
now. But for me, I know that I've been open to healings and haven't necessarily seen them manifest themselves.
Right. And
So
I have
what?
too. I've,
Yeah.
I've been a part of things where I really wanted to see. My son's a type 1 diabetic. He's been diagnosed with type 1 diabetes since he was 4. He's had 2 seizures because of it, because his sugar goes too low. I desperately want to see my son get healed, but I've prayed over him countless times. It still hasn't happened. I have a brother-in-law who's a paranoid schizophrenic. He is out of his mind, and it affects everyone in the family, and it hurts everyone in the family. Prayed over him several times. Still has paranoid schizophrenia. I don't want to just use my experience again to say healing doesn't happen, and that's what so
Right.
many people do. Because I've also got experience where I've seen healing happen. I've seen backs be restored. I've seen eyesight restored. I've seen hearing restored. I've seen ears open up. That boy, that was the paralyzed boy. Before we could leave, he also said, "Tell them to pray or speak into my ear because I'm deaf in this ear." So we put a hand on his head, and his ear opened up, and he could hear us talking out of his left ear again. I mean, it's just, you see some things, and then you see other times. And I don't want to build a theology off of my encounters. You know what I mean? I want to let my encounters just flow from a relationship with Holy Spirit, with God, with Jesus. So, yeah, I think I mean, I'm right there with you. You're in a good place, like for you to not say, I'm not going to let this destroy my faith. What does that say about what I want from God? I only want God to do what I want him to do.
Right.
I mean, so you don't really have a good understanding of God if that's your take.
Yeah. Amen. Amen. So, introductory matters. So one of the reasons I wanted to have you on is just because I was reaching out to people. I was like, hey, who wants to be on my mattnews.biz podcast live stream thing?
Yeah.
I do want to address one thing is Facebook. We're having a problem with the stream on Facebook. So if you're watching this stream, hopefully you're watching on YouTube, you can still leave a comment in the comment section below, and we'll still see that pop up in as a chat. Or I think even YouTube has a chat with live, but I'll still see your questions if you want to submit those as well. We're also on Twitch. So we're Twitch, YouTube, and Facebook we're having issues with, but whatever. That's Facebook. It's Zuck. He's zucking us, man.
You got Zuck.
Yeah. But we're here. So I reached out, you kind of answered the call, and I let you know, I let you know that, hey, I'm already interviewing 2 guys about kind of end times, eschatology type things. Because the last episode I did, we talked about Israel, and it was a little bit about eschatology, but it was more of just how we should view Israel and the Jews and the people of Israel and things like that. And because I believe that those views really shape how you're going to view the end times and how you're going to view prophecy and things like that. Because if you're waiting for something to happen and it might not happen, you're going to be waiting for a long time. Right. So that's what I kind of talked about last episode. But this episode, we're actually going to talk about some prophecy. My first episode, we talked about Daniel 9 we were talking about the 70 weeks, but today you kind of brought this up, but let's talk about the beast from Daniel and kind of compare and contrast, if you can, with the beast of Revelation. I'm going to be honest. I don't know. I haven't studied this in depth, so you're going to kind of lead the way, and I'll ask questions where, I'm get kind of interested in it.
Okay. All right. So, yeah, I mean, I think with anything in the Bible, the best place to start, though, is perspectives. Because you can very easily just throw a lens over the scripture that you're about to read. And You can make it say what you want it to say. And I think a lot of where we are now, for the past 200 years or so, I would say maybe 150 years even, we have been predominantly premillennial, dispensationalist, futurist eschatology. I think the futurist part, not necessarily the premillennial part, but the futurist part is really just kind of exploded since World War I and World War II. And I think the reason for that is because in a post-millennial view, things are supposed to be getting better, because in a post-millennial view, your kingdom is already established, and the kingdom is growing, right? So things should be getting better in that aspect. But in a premillennial view, things are supposed to get worse before Jesus can come back. And so I know that looking at church history for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years, they were post-millennial, they were kingdom now, kingdom focused, more of an ebb and flow kind of thing. Like, we have some bad times, we have some great times. And I know that the bad stuff that we have now is not the kingdom, but the good stuff is the kingdom. But then it's like Civil War in American history happened, World War I happened, World War II, the Holocaust, and people started saying, this doesn't really feel like things are getting better.
Right.
And then, you throw on top of that, you throw a bunch of literature and a bunch of, you got the late great Planet Earth with, who did that? Hal Lindsey? Is that the guy? I think it was Hal Lindsey did the book, The Late Great Planet Earth, and the Jesus movement took off in the 60s and 70s, and that was their main book that they loved, was The Late Great Planet Earth, and it just kind of exploded this futurist eschatology. Then we had the Left Behind series, which I didn't understand eschatology as a ninth grader in high school, so I'm like, these dudes are my dudes. They're going to tell me Kirk Cameron's going to lead the way for me. And still didn't understand it by the time I got done reading all of it. I'm like, I don't know. And so, I think it's good to set a kind of a context. If we just say, look, if we just look at the Bible and let's just try to understand this to the reader. What did it mean to the reader who was reading it? Because if I take a futurist lens, for instance, if I look at the book of Revelation as John wrote that at a certain time period for 2,000 years later, I'm going to get a totally different story than if I understand it that he wrote that for something that was going to happen within 3 years. Mm-hmm. Totally different narrative, totally different story. And if I go at it with that narrative lens on there, it's going to say things that it may not say. So I got to be really careful what my lens is. And I think the best place to really start with the whole thing of eschatology is in the book of Daniel. I'll just give you a little snippet of how I got to this point in understanding eschatology, and I don't even understand it. You know what I mean? Like, I'll be very vulnerable, very honest with you about eschatology. Like, for so many years, I was taught futurist, and I didn't know why. When I asked why, I was told, you just have to believe that. You just have to have enough faith. So I put it up on a shelf because I'm like, I'm what they call the pantheist. It'll all pan out in the end. I'll figure it out one day. And I just gave up on it. But then somebody actually showed me some stuff, and I'm like, this makes everything make sense to me. Still don't have all the answers. And I'll be very honest with you. If you ask me a question about some of this stuff and I'm looking at it, I'll be like, if I don't know, I'm going to say, yeah, I have no idea. There's some stuff in like Revelation 13 when I'm looking at the beasts and I'm like, I have no idea what that means. Yeah. But I have a general overview that makes much more sense to me logically. And so I wanted to throw that out there because I'm still in this journey. I'm still wanting to figure this stuff out. I'm still eating it up,
Yeah, I've actually had a few conversations with people at work, and I'm actually going on this kind of eschatological journey with a buddy of mine who I met because of a podcast. He actually has a podcast, and I started listening to it and found out he lived in Florida, and so me and him have become really close friends. And he's kind of the one who's not really directing me, but he's kind of getting me back into this. Well, I wonder what how it is going to end. Yeah. But even when I told him, like when I went to the Baptist College of Florida, I had a professor who was he was a partial preterist.
Oh, really?
And so he actually is the one who introduced me to the whole thing, and so it's always been in the back of my mind. But the fact that I met somebody so many years later, and they're looking into this, and they're kind of going on this journey. And so I'm kind of going along with this journey with him.
Yeah.
But what I tell people at work is like sometimes, like I do this where I'm here, I'm talking about it while I'm on the journey and I don't have all the answers, but
Right.
hey, here's what I'm learning. And
Right.
I find that I learn that way a lot better.
Yeah. And it's good to be vulnerable, man. It's good to be open about it because it shows like, hey, I just want to learn. Like my heart is not to be right. My heart
Yeah.
is not to have the answers. My heart's just to learn and grow,
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah. Well, I was going to say, so you mentioned futurist a couple of times. I don't know if you defined it, but futurist is just kind of that, your end times view, your view of prophecy is that a lot of it, specifically in, like Daniel and Matthew, Jesus, when he talks about the Olivet Discourse, all that stuff is future events. Right. The book of Revelation is future events,
right.
The prophecy and their future events.
Right. Right. Yeah. So there's, just to give you a quick breakdown of that, there's basically 4 main ways of looking at eschatology. Mm-hmm. 2 of them are a broad sweep, and that's futurist and preterist. And each one of them have their own little branches, like partial preterist, full preterist. So futurist, it says that mainly the stuff in Daniel and the stuff that's in Matthew, Mark, and Luke of the Olivet Discourse, where Jesus was walking outside the temple and he talked to his disciples and said, "You see this? It's all going to be destroyed, and this is what's going to happen." They said, "Well, tell us what are going to be the signs of the end of the age." And he says, "There's going to be wars, rumors of wars, famines, earthquakes, all this fun stuff." So futurist takes that and says that's what's coming before he returns to rapture us all, before or in the middle or at the end of the Great Tribulation. And the futurist eschatology includes things like Mark of the Beast, the Antichrist, the 7-year tribulation, the rapture. Those are like the main things. So the preterist view is that the book of Daniel speaks of things that were to happen. Mainly, the book of Daniel outlines a timeline to happen before the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. The things that Jesus spoke about in the Olivet Discourse were referring to what it was going to look like before we went from the old covenant age or the age of Moses into the age of the Messiah, what it was going to look like before that shift, because that's what they asked. They said, what's the end of the age? How do we know we're in the end of the age? And he says, these things will happen before that happens. And then in Revelation would be the letter that John wrote because of the vision that he had to his 7 churches, because he was the apostle of 7 churches. He wrote this letter to those 7 churches saying, hey, this is what's about to happen. Jesus has shown me a vision of what's about to happen. But those are the main 2. There's 2 more that only refer to the book of Revelation, and that is historicism, which is basically that the book of Revelation symbolically lays out a timeline of the entire history of planet Earth. And I think we are now in Revelation 13 somewhere, according to historicism. And then the 4th one is, I always get this word confused, but I think it's illustrative. The illustrative? Anyway, it's basically just that it's an allegory. It's an allegory about good and evil. And that's only for the book of Revelation. That's not for all of eschatology.
Yeah, hold on a second. I actually have I have this book, The 4 Views of Revelation.
Oh, wow.
So hold on. It says it. This one calls it the spiritual, but
for the illustrative one.
Yeah, I don't know if it's illustrative or if there's another word for it.
Yeah, I think it starts with I though.
I thought it started with an A.
Maybe allegorical.
Yeah, of course I can't find it easy.
I can't remember what it is, but anyway, it's basically that the book of Revelation isn't
symbolic.
Right, it's all symbolic. It doesn't tell of any things that are going to happen. It's just about good and evil. And I know that I'm pretty sure, I don't want to say this matter-of-factly, but I know like for the Passion Translation of Revelation, Brian Simmons, he went that route on that. He believes it's an allegory instead of actually events that are going to happen. But I didn't even know that there was more than just futurist until I was 33. I'm 36 now. And so I've been on this 3-year journey of the Bible finally making sense to me, because I had been taught this is what it means. And I remember in Bible college, I'd be like, well, what's with the gaps? That was my biggest hang up with gaps. And I'll tell you about gaps in just a second. But that would just say that one day you'll get it. One day when you're reading prophecy, you'll get it. And I'm like, that's not good enough for me. I want to know why we get to what we believe. Oh, just have faith, brother. I'm like, that doesn't make any sense to me, what you're saying.
Yeah.
Like, just have faith. I want to believe why you decoded something a certain way. And you're telling me I just have to believe what you're saying. That doesn't make sense to me. So I got frustrated.
Yeah. A buddy of mine, he was saying, well, the guy I interviewed 2 episodes ago, his name is Ken Mady. And so Ken was, one of the statements he made on that podcast was, imagine when you're going to the Lord, and you're laying out all this stuff, and the Lord's like, oh, well, why did you teach that? And it's like, well, Lord, that's what you put in your word. And he goes, oh no, well, that word he, that really meant the Antichrist, and you just interpreted it wrong.
Oh my goodness.
And so, but like, it's that, well, I'm reading your word literally.
Right.
And so, and we'll just have to ask for forgiveness if we read it wrong.
Yeah, because being accepted into heaven has everything to do with which eschatology you agree with.
Exactly. Yeah. We all know this.
We all know this. This is common. So I think the best place is, personally, for me, it's to start with Daniel. And Daniel is such an incredible book, not because I like the name, but just because the book was so. There is a lot of liberal scholars that believe that Daniel could not have written that before the events that took place happened, because it was just so accurate as far as timeline and as far as description and stuff goes. So we'll start. I guess we'll just start. There's what's called a chiastic structure. Are you familiar with chiasm? Yeah, chiasm. Yeah. So there's a chiastic structure in this where there's a Nebuchadnezzar's dream in Daniel chapter 2, and then followed by Daniel's vision, and he has visions of beasts. But Nebuchadnezzar has a vision, or has a dream of a statue, and there's a chiastic structure between the two because they directly relate. You don't know what a chiastic structure is in the Bible. I'm not even sure I completely understand it, to be honest with you, but it's mirrored points that they don't quite ascend to an apex like we would think in Western theology or Western thought, but they kind of go along the line and then they bring it back. And so they kind of mirror each other on those points. Is that a good, accurate description?
I think so. I can't tell you a scholarly one, but if we go by an example, we have, Genesis is a perfect. I think Genesis is always a perfect illustration of a chiasm, which it's just a literary format. It's a poetic format.
It's a Hebrew poetic format. They did it a lot. Yeah.
Exactly. And so Genesis is a perfect one because you have, day one, and of course I can't remember Genesis, but day one, light and dark. But then, I think it's day 4, he makes the moon and the stars,
right?
And then he makes the sky and the water, and then on the 5th day he fills it with the fish.
It's like day 2 he creates the heavens, and he creates the water. But on day 5, I think it is, he splits them. Right. And he fills them or something like that. Yeah, I can't remember exactly the structure either. But yeah, the chiastic structure is that they mirror each other in a very poetic fashion, in a very it's like a romantic.
But that puts the emphasis on whatever's in the middle.
Right.
So like what you're saying, let's just continue on with that. You're saying that Daniel chapter 7 specifically has this kind of, is it? No, it's not 7 specifically. It's
2. It's 2, and I believe 4. I'm looking here. Not 4.
I actually just watched the Bible Project video, and they were talking about that.
Oh yeah, I love those guys.
Yeah,
I love those videos. Those are great.
Yeah,
I had to watch those for my school at Bethel. That was like our assignments.
Oh really?
It is 7. It's 2 and 7. So we'll start with the statue. Because each one of those, we don't even have to wonder what these elements of the statue mean, because Daniel is the one who gives us the interpretation.
Yeah.
So in Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar has this dream, Daniel chapter 2. And in the dream, he sees this statue. It's got a gold head. It's got silver arms and chest. It's got bronze belly and thighs. And then it's got feet and legs and feet of iron and clay. And Nebuchadnezzar's so messed up by this dream, but he wants his magi, his wise men, to interpret it for him. He doesn't want to tell them what the dream is. He wants an authentic interpretation, so he makes them interpret it for him. But they have to tell him what the dream was before he'll let them interpret. And if you get it wrong, he's going to kill you. And so Daniel's the only one that can actually not just interpret it, but tell him what the dream is. And he tells him what the dream is. And then Daniel 2, we don't have to read it because that's going to take up more time.
Yeah,
he actually lays out that the head of gold is you, Nebuchadnezzar. And then after that, the arms and chest of silver, I believe it was silver, that's going to be another kingdom that comes after you. And then followed by another kingdom, which is the bronze thighs and legs. That's going to be another kingdom that's going to come after you. And then there's going to be another kingdom, a fourth kingdom that comes. And then a rock, he talks about this rock that's going to come and hit the toes. It's going to have 10 toes. And the rock's going to hit at the toes. And it's a rock not cut with hands. And that's very important to remember. And then it's going to shatter the whole thing. And so Nebuchadnezzar does the classic example of what you do when you misinterpret God's dream that he gives you. And he builds a statue for everybody to worship. Like, oh, cool, I totally missed it. You're telling me that a kingdom's going to come and crush me, another kingdom, another kingdom, another kingdom. Finally, there's going to be another fifth kingdom that's set up in the middle of the fourth kingdom. And it's going to be a kingdom that never lasts or never ends and lasts forever. And it's going to keep growing. And I've lost my train of thought. But it was a never-ending kingdom. And it was not built with hands. That's what it was. And so he misses that completely, but all he gets is, oh man, I'm the head of gold. And so he makes a statue. That's when you get the fiery furnace and all that fun stuff. And then the beasts, fast forward to the beasts, Daniel has a vision of 4 beasts, and it starts with a lion. This lion is made to walk upright like a man. And then it follows by a bear who had 2 ribs in his mouth. Then it was followed by a leopard with 4 wings. And then it was followed by this great terrifying beast, which he doesn't actually name. He just says it's a great terrifying beast, and it has 10 horns. And so I don't remember exactly if you got the interpretation of this, but he does. The interpretation is that the lion is the kingdom that they're currently in, and then it's going to be followed by the bear, which is the Medo-Persians. And there's little elements of each one of these beasts that ties it to these empires that are going to take over. For instance, the lion made to walk like a man is very interesting. A beast made to walk like a man and given the mind of a man. Nebuchadnezzar, if you remember in the story, after the statue and after the fiery furnace, he goes crazy. He goes out in the field. He becomes like an animal. He eats the dirt and the grass. He just goes wild. And then finally, after God's humbled him, God gives him his mind back. So he's given, but the description of Nebuchadnezzar was that he had hair like feathers and nails like claws, that he had been so out in the wild for so long. And so we see this beast, this man turned into a beast, given his mind back. And so that was the representation that this was Nebuchadnezzar. Then the bear with the 2 ribs in his mouth was the Medo-Persians, according to the statue's next kingdom. The Medo-Persians, the reason that they're called the Medo-Persians, it's the Medes and the Persians. And they combined, and they got their power by conquering 2 other kingdoms. It was the kingdom of Lydia and the kingdom of Egypt. And so the 2 ribs in his mouth, was it 2 ribs or 3 ribs?
I think it was 2.
Was it 2? Let's look real quick. I just want to be sure, because I feel like there's a third one. It's Lydia, Egypt, and the Medes. So I think it was 3.
Yeah. Hold on.
Yeah, 3 ribs. It was 3 ribs. So the bear had 3 ribs. Verse 5. Another beast, the second one, like a bear, it was raised up on one side. It had 3 ribs, because it was the kingdom of Lydia, the kingdom of Egypt, and the kingdom of the Medes.
Right.
And then they conquered Babylon. And then the coolest one for me, my favorite one, is the leopard, because the empire that followed the leopard, or followed the Medo-Persians, was the Greek Empire. Alexander the Conqueror, Alexander the Great. First of all, it's a leopard. Okay. The thing we can know about leopards is leopards are stinking fast. They're like the fastest known land animal, I think. I'm not seeing
cheetahs.
Cheetahs. Okay. Leopards are fast too. Maybe this is like the Hebrew word for cheetahs. I don't know. So the leopards are fast, right? And it had four wings. And if you know history, and you know when Alexander the Great died, he separated his kingdom, and he had conquered almost the entire known world at that time. And he separated his kingdom, his dynasty, he separated into four parts because he gave it to four kingdoms. It was Cassander, I forget one guy's name, Seleucia, and Cassander. My brain's just not working today. But he said, Ptolemy. Was it Cassander, Seleucia, Ptolemy, and then I forget the fourth one. But he split it up into four kingdoms. And so this was a leopard. This empire is represented by a leopard that has four wings. And then we see this dragon, or this great beast, it says, and it has 10 horns. And it's the one that follows. And so the empire that followed the Greeks was the Roman Empire. So what's interesting is that you have the Nebuchadnezzar is represented now in this chiastic structure, is represented in the dream as a head of gold, and in the beast as a lion. And then the next part is the silver arms and chest, and a bear with 3 ribs is the Medo-Persians. And then you have the bronze thighs and torso area mixed also with the leopard, and that is the Greek Empire. And then you have the 10 toes and the feet of iron and clay mixed with a great beast with 10 horns, and that's the Roman Empire. And I've heard a lot of people trying to pinpoint why 10, like was it the 10 provinces, or was it the 10 kingdoms that they split up into eventually? I don't really know. I would lean more to say that it was 10 provinces at the time that Jesus showed up, because we have to match this rock that we know is coming at the feet of the statue is Jesus. It says it's Jesus. In fact, that's one we should probably read just to get it right.
Yeah. Hold on. What where's that at? Daniel
2.
Daniel 2. What version are you reading?
I have the first one I grabbed was ESV. I have a couple that I like.
Okay. Hold on. If you have ESV, then let me make my second translation here. ESV.
What do you have?
I like to use NET. Caleb Hires, he turned me on to NET.
Oh yeah.
Just because of all the footnotes, like there's a lot of discrepancies I have with it. I'm like, I'm not sure about this part, this translation. But the fact that they have just a ton of footnotes, I think it's worth anybody to read it.
This might sound heretical. I don't actually think there's a right version. I think there's some wrong versions. But I don't know if I would say there's one version that's going to get everything right. And I don't think you should trust that.
No. No. Yeah, well, no. So the guy I know, Ken Mady, he just finished a whole series about the King James Bible and what the King James translators, what they said at the beginning, like the preface. And one of their things was that, marginal notes and footnotes are great because, it'll give you insight on why they translated things a certain way. And so I agree that there's no like one right English translation of the Bible.
Right.
And so that's why I think that having a multitude of them is great. But there are wrong ones. There are definitely wrong ones.
For sure. But I would also say there's some that you shouldn't use as scripture, that they should be more commentaries, and people call them scripture. I mean, I don't get hung up on things, but I don't want to throw everything out is what my problem is, but I also don't want to just accept one as the catch-all.
Right. Well, like I was saying, I've been using NET because it has so many footnotes. But I also I carry around an HCSB. I have an ESV in my backpack. I have an NASB on my bookshelf. I have a ton of Bibles. They're all over the place.
I love different perspectives. I love seeing different versions.
Yeah. So what I have here is I have. Actually, you know what? If you got ESV, let's just read ESV. There we go.
Yeah, well, it doesn't matter. You can read yours.
No, we'll have ESV. ESV is fine. ESV is fine.
I mean, if you don't mind lowering your standards a little bit.
I don't think that. Just letting everyone know. All right, so what verse are we starting in here?
That's what I'm looking to see where to
Dream.
start. It's in chapter 2. They will not hold together. And in these days, those kings of the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed. So he's interpreting the rock now. So it's in his interpretation, which starts in 36. If you go down, he just kind of explains what the dream was, and he says, "This was the dream. Now we will tell the king its interpretation. You, O king, the king of kings, to whom the God of heaven has given the kingdom, the power, and the might, and the glory, and into whose hand he has given, whereas they dwell, the children of man, the beasts of the field, and the birds of the heavens." I'm going to skip down. He says, "You are the head of gold." Verse 39, he says, "Another kingdom inferior to you shall arise after you, and yet a third kingdom of bronze, which shall rule over all the earth." That's the bronze one is the Greek Empire. "And there shall be a fourth kingdom, strong as iron, because iron breaks to pieces and shatters all things. And like iron that crushes, it shall break and crush all these. And as you saw the feet and toes, partly of potter's clay and partly of iron, it shall be a divided kingdom. But some of the firmness of iron shall be in it, just as you saw iron mixed with the soft clay. And as the toes of the feet were partly iron and partly clay, so the kingdom shall be partly strong and partly brittle. As you saw the iron mixed with soft clay, so they will mix with one another in marriage. But they will not hold together, just as iron does not mix with clay." And so here's where he starts describing the rock. He says, "And in those days of those kings," meaning the one of the fourth kingdom, "the God of heaven will set up a kingdom that shall never be destroyed, nor shall the kingdom be left to another people. It shall break in pieces all these kingdoms and bring them to an end, and it shall stand forever. Just as you saw that a stone was cut from a mountain by no human hand, and that it broke in pieces the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold. A great God has made known to the king what shall be after this. The dream is certain in its interpretation sure." And so, in essence, what we have is that because of Nebuchadnezzar's dream, we now see thousands of years, I shouldn't say 500 years later, of what's going to happen in the next 500 years before the actual Messiah comes. There's going to be a kingdom set up, and the Messiah is going to be the king of that kingdom. And this is one of the reasons why the Jews missed Jesus, because they saw this and they interpreted that a king was coming to overthrow kingdoms, and it was going to look like an earthly kingdom. They were expecting a kingdom that was just so strong in the confines of what earthly kingdoms look like, that no other kingdom could touch it. They had no idea that everything was going to turn upside down on its head, that the kingdom was going to be built without hands, that there was not going to be a temple anymore. Here to be the temple. They didn't know that all this was going to change. They just thought a political figure, and they actually still believe this, a political figure is going to show up, and he's going to take over, and he's going to build a kingdom that nobody will see coming, and nobody will be able to prevail against. And so that's why they missed it. But what we can take from this is that Nebuchadnezzar's dream absolutely sets up a timeline for when Jesus shows up. And the problem with the different views of eschatology is that there's always this gap. There's this gap that happens between the bronze and the clay. It's like this, on the statue, the feet get chopped off. And they say there's this unknown amount of time in between those things. And then that last 10 toes, that's going to be the one world government. But the Bible doesn't say anything about that gap. And that was one of the main questions I had. Like, why do you think that there's a gap? And I didn't get to watch your, you said you guys talked about the 70 weeks of Daniel.
Yeah.
So in a nutshell, can you just tell me what was the conclusion on that? Like,
his conclusion is that if you follow Daniel's 70 weeks and you follow it just like it is, where it says it's going to start with I believe he said King Darius's decree to go and rebuild the temple. If you start from there and you literally just click like a stopwatch and you follow it down the line, it goes all the way up to the 70 weeks, or the 70th week, right?
Mm-hmm. Well, the 69th week, 483 years.
No, well, even that is that it'll end. The whole thing, the whole 70 weeks ends with the death of Stephen, because that's because he was saying, because that's when they literally disperse out, like the church disperses out from there, and they no longer are specifically driven to Israel. They're going to go out to the nations, to the end of Syria and like that. And I believe he said that the 69th week is when Jesus dies. But he said basically you follow the timeline like a clock,
Right.
know,
and that's what I've been studying too. I've heard the Stephen thing, but I don't know that I'm there yet. I don't know. I'm still at the part where because it says a week of 7 and then a week of 69 or 62, which you get 69, which is in years, that's 483 years. And so I'm at that point of from the decree going 483 years and then wondering about the 70th week. I'm still working all that out. But I was just wondering because I've heard other timelines that line it up with watching the kingdoms and watching the Gabriel's 70 weeks and lining up exactly when Jesus shows up. And so for me, like it would make a lot of sense because the wise men were the ones who came from the east, and Daniel was the leader of the wise men in Babylon. And so the reason the wise men knew is because they knew the calculations that Daniel had talked about, that the kingdom, the 490 years or the 483 years and all that stuff. And so I'm still working on that part, but with the statue matching with the beast's description of the statue and those kingdoms, it makes complete sense that the rock that's thrown at the feet would be Jesus, and he would be born during the Roman Empire. But for some reason, the futurist interpretation, or at least what I had been taught by futurist teachers and pastors, was that rock is the Antichrist, that the empire of the feet and the last beast with 10 horns would be the one world government that would be set up. That's why everybody freaked out. I don't know if you remember this because you're about my age, right? You're like in your 30s, mid 30s.
Yeah, 34.
You're 34. Okay, I'm 36. So I remember. I don't know if you remember this, but do you remember when the European Union was instated? And the first time it was instated was 10 countries, and like I saw things everywhere. Like people were talking about it in church. My pastor was like going nuts. He's like, "It's happening! It's happening! It's the 10 countries, the 10 horns of the beast." It's the 10 toes on the statue.
I've heard it. I've heard it so many times about that I think I just kind of blocked it off because I actually didn't get saved until 2001. I didn't become a Christian in 2001, so I never heard anything before that. I did have a DVD of John Hagee. And that and Apache helicopters, and stuff like that.
Yeah. The locusts, right?
The locusts are Apache helicopters. But so the Rock, I agree with you. I believe the Rock is not only Jesus, but it's the Christian kingdom as well. Because one thing that we talked about in the episode I did with Ken was when the Rock strikes down, the Rock actually begins to grow.
Right.
And so that's a picture of the kingdom of Christ growing, and spreading across the earth. And that's actually what happened. You see that happen in when Stephen dies, when Stephen's killed, that's when the church, spreads out. Yeah.
And it goes not only just to the Jews, but also the Gentiles there. That would make sense.
Exactly.
Right after, not because of that, but right after, yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's something cool I would want to look into as well, because it seems like I would fall in line with that, but.
Yeah, go back. I would invite you, and I would invite the anybody who's watching right now to go back and watch that episode because it gives a lot of context of kind of what we're talking about now.
Yeah. Okay. Great. Yeah. So I think the gist of the I know I started with the dream, and we said we were going to talk about beasts today, but I think the beasts in a chiastic structure, they just reflect more what the representations of the statue were, and that is that they represent kingdoms. And so real quick, I'm going to see in chapter 7, there is an interpretation there as well for his vision. And it says, Daniel, my spirit within me was anxious, and the visions of my head alarmed me. I approached one of those who stood there and asked him the truth concerning all this. Must have been an angel. So he told me and made known to me the interpretation of the things. These 4 great beasts are 4 kings who shall arise out of the earth. But the saints of the Most High shall receive the kingdom and possess the kingdom forever and ever. Then I desired to know the truth about the 4th beast. This is the one that has the 10 horns, the great terrifying beast, and the iron teeth. With its teeth, exceedingly terrifying, with its teeth of iron and claws of bronze, and which devoured and broke in pieces and stamped what was left with its feet. And about the 10 horns that were on its head, and the other horn that came up before which 3 of them fell. The horn that had eyes and a mouth that spoke great things, and that seemed greater than its companions. As I looked, this horn made war with the saints and prevailed over them, until the Ancient of Days came, and judgment was given for the saints of the Most High. And the time came when the saints possessed the kingdom. And then he says, as for the fourth beast, there shall be a fourth kingdom on earth, which shall be different from all the kingdoms. It shall devour the whole earth and trample it down and break to pieces. As for the 10 horns, out of this kingdom 10 kings shall arise, and another shall arise after them. He shall be different from the former ones, and shall put down 3 kings. He shall speak words against the Most High. He shall wear out the saints of the Most High, and shall think to change the times and the law. And they shall be given into his hand for a time, times and a half time. But the court shall sit in judgment, and his dominion shall be taken away, to be consumed and destroyed to the end. And the kingdom and the dominion and the greatness of the kingdoms under the whole heaven shall be given to the people of the saints of the Most High. His kingdom shall be an everlasting kingdom, and all dominions shall serve and obey him. And so, to me, if I'm looking at the statue and the succession of these elements that represent kingdoms, and then I look at the beasts and the succession of these that devour their predecessors, I cannot say that that fourth element of the statue and the fourth kingdom, the fourth beast, is a kingdom that hasn't happened yet 2,500 years later. You see, and this was one of the things that I always used to get hung up on when I was trying to learn about eschatology. And I would say, but why is there a gap? Why do you say, yes, the head of bronze or the head of gold is Nebuchadnezzar? That's the lion. Yes, the Medo-Persians is the second element, and it's the second beast. Yes, the what was the third one? Greek Empire is the third element, and it's the third beast. But we're not going to talk about the Roman Empire. The Roman Empire doesn't exist in this analogy. We're just going to skip ahead and say that that beast represents the government that's to come, where a whole world is taken over. And I know that there's different reasons. I think it goes back to what we said before, where we have this lens that we try to cram a theology into, and we try to make it say things that it may not say. And one of the things that, like going back to the Olivet Discourse, Jesus said that when he laid out all those things, he said, not one generation will pass before these things happen. And a generation in biblical terms is 40 years. Right. He said that in 30 AD, roughly, and 40 years later, the destruction of the temple happened and the siege of Jerusalem happened at 70 AD. But because people want to fit that into a futurist narrative, they automatically, with good intentions, they just want this to make sense. They just assume a generation must mean something else. And so they go looking to make a generation mean something else. And I've heard so many different things, like Genea in the Greek means a race of people. So this race won't ever fade away. But that's not what Jesus said. He didn't use the word for race. He used the word for generation, the word meaning a lifespan of a generation. That's what he meant. Was that 40 years were going to pass before all these things happen. And if you look at each one of those things in the Olivet Discourse, the wars, the rumors of wars, the earthquakes, those things happened. The famines, they happened. Agabus in the book of Acts prophesies over a famine that was about to happen within that same time. So it kind of sets the stage. If I start in Daniel, I start to say, okay, this seems like, because in theology and seminary, I was never taught about the destruction of Jerusalem. You went to Baptist College, right? Florida Baptist College?
Yeah, Baptist College of Florida.
Baptist College of Florida. Yeah, there's two different ones. I forgot. Did they teach you about the destruction of the temple?
Well, this is how I got into it. I had a professor.
Oh, that's right. You said he was a preterist, right?
Yeah, and he was a preterist. And the thing was, we were actually, I was in his Old Testament survey class, and you know, when you're in college, like the big thing is like, hey, let's get our professor off topic. And so they would ask him about, you know, hey, what are your views on the end times and stuff like that. And he was very open, you know, I'm a partial preterist. He actually said he was amillennialist. But I think he was more post-millennialist than he was amillennialist.
Yeah.
You know, so he was partial preterist. And so I didn't know what that meant. And so he would openly talk about the destruction of the temple in 70 AD. He actually gave me a bunch of the books he gave me the Revelation of Four Views. I've got a book called The Book of Revelation Made Easy by Kenneth Gentry.
Yeah, I know Ken Gentry. I love his stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, he gave me a bunch of Kenneth Gentry books.
Yeah.
He even gave me 2 books that are just specifically about the destruction of Jerusalem and Daniel 70 weeks.
Yeah.
I haven't read them yet.
Getting there.
Well, because I think if I would have read them when I got them, it would have it wouldn't have made sense. But I
Sure,
think
yeah.
I really do feel like the Lord has prepared me for now. Such a time as this.
There's
You know,
stuff that I started reading like years ago that I only start reading it now. I'm like, I did not get that the first time I read it, and it's more revelational to me now than it would have been way back then when I started. So yeah.
Absolutely. For me, the same thing, because I'm finding that a lot of the views that I held previously are being challenged almost constantly.
That's growth, bro.
Well, yeah, I think so too. But and I was talking with the guy I had last time, Adam Graham. We were talking about this, and I was telling him that, like, where was I going with this? I lost my train of thought. I was going, the locomotive was going, and then it just like stopped suddenly.
I hate it. I got to cut sugar out of my diet. Someone was telling me, I was talking to a friend of mine this morning. He said that because I've been taking in so much sugar lately, and my brain is just so cloudy. I don't normally get so foggy brained, but I've been super foggy brained lately. It's because I've been eating a lot of ice cream and powdered donuts.
Yeah. I've got to get back out of the sugar too. But I think what I was trying to talk about was just the growth, and can't remember what I was going to say. I can't catch it. I can't get it.
It's good to grow. That's what you were going to say.
It's good to grow. It's good to grow. But you have to. You have to. And
you can't close your mind off. That's for sure. I mean, I think right now that one of the really strong principles, I don't even know what to call it, but just an understood foundation right now on Christianity, or prevailing thought in Christianity, is to center around what we can agree upon. And that's kind of ostracizing. That kind of isolates people out if they have questions. It doesn't give people the chance to think. And I think you need to be responsible. I think you need to be able to have an open mind, but like they say, not too much that your brains fall out.
Right.
But I think you need to be able to have the freedom to decide for yourself. I think one of the things, like coming out to this school, Bethel gets a lot of crap. And I know, because I came from the side that gives them all the crap, or at least one of the sides that gives them all the crap. And one of the things that I appreciate the most about them is that I went to Trinity Baptist College in Jacksonville. I went to Luther Rice Seminary online, and I went to Emmaus Baptist College in Brandon, Florida. And I never got this from any of them, but when I showed up on day one, I kind of thought I knew what I was going to expect from a Bible school. And on day one, they said, here's the deal. We're going to look at the Bible. We are going to use the Bible. We're not going to teach you what to think. We're going to teach you how to read the Bible. We're going to teach you how to interpret the Bible. You may come up with theology that's different from what we believe. You may come up with something that's different than what you were taught, but we're not going to teach you what to think. We're going to teach you how to think, because we want to empower you. That was one of the most liberating, freeing things that I've ever felt in my life. I was 33 years old when I first heard this, and I'm like, holy crap. You mean, like, I came all this way? I came 4,000 miles to a school, and you're going to trust me to believe what I want to believe? Like, people come from all over the world to go to this school, and you want them, each one of them. There were 3,000 students in my class. You want each one of them to just decide what they're going to believe? Like, I felt confused and empowered at the same time. It was amazing. And it was the best 2 years of my life so far.
Yeah. I remember what I was going to say. So the things that I learned, what happens is I'll read the Bible and it'll just make more sense.
Yeah.
Like, it's like, okay, with the way that I'm looking at things now, this makes complete and utter sense.
Right.
Like, for example, so I actually, with the Crossing, we actually started our own Bible college, and I taught hermeneutics and New Testament survey and Old Testament survey. And when I was teaching hermeneutics, I actually did a lesson on historical context and how historical context can help. Context outside of the Bible helps you interpret the Bible.
Absolutely.
And so I actually was talking about the two disciples on the road to Emmaus, and how Jesus had just died. And so all the disciples are kind of dispersing. They're leaving because their whole idea of who Jesus was, this idea that the Messiah, the Mashiach, was going to be this conqueror, and it just didn't happen. And so you have the two disciples who are on the road to Emmaus, and Emmaus to us doesn't mean anything. Like it's like, oh, it's a city in Jerusalem. But if you look at the history of Emmaus, Emmaus was where the Judah Maccabee fought against the Greeks, and it was one of the many. It was one of the I don't say many, but one of the few victories that the Jewish army had over them.
Wow.
And so Emmaus would be equivalent to us, would be like Gettysburg, you know, or Battle of the Bulge or something like that. So it's this historic site where a battle was won for the Jewish people. And so if you look
against
at that,
all odds too.
Against all odds.
Yeah.
And so and that's in the book of Maccabees, which is not canon. It's not canon. It's apocrypha. It's not in the canon. But you know, it's still the book of Maccabees came out before Jesus was born. And so that's history that Jesus would have known. That's history that the disciples would have known. And that's history that Jesus would have known, that the disciples would have known. And so Jesus dies, their conqueror dies. They start making their way to Gettysburg to go and celebrate, probably to celebrate a general who had a victory over an oppressive government. Yeah. And then Jesus meets them halfway and completely reshapes the way that they thought. And so I actually did a podcast on this a while ago, but I was teaching it as well. The point I made in my podcast was that they didn't recognize him. They were going to this place, this historic site, and so they had their history remembered, and so that's what their mind was set on, their old memory. But then when Jesus went to Emmaus with them, and Jesus sat down with them to eat dinner, he broke bread and did the cup. So the language that is the same language we get in Luke and the Gospels, where Jesus broke bread, poured the cup, and that's communion. That's the Lord's Supper. And so, and that's that when Jesus performed the Lord's Supper to the disciples in Emmaus, that's when they recognized him and saw him. So their memory was shifted. Their focus was shifted from the old memory, the old, the way that they are thinking, to the new way they're thinking, and they recognize them.
That's beautiful.
And so that's historical context that, you know, I mean, that's something where after reading Maccabees and after reading Emmaus, I was like, oh man, like that makes so much more sense to me. And that it has more meaning to it, more nuance to it. And I think, you know, when you read the Bible and you're just like, you know, yep, that's what it is, you miss out on so much nuance.
And I think
with the beasts.
I think that's a great segue to getting into Revelation, because there's beasts in Revelation, right? But I think that so much of this is going to be my personal opinion, so I'm not going to speak so matter-of-factly about this, but my personal opinion is that so much of our misinterpretation of Revelation and eschatology is because we are not looking at historical context. We are not looking at what were they hearing when they read this out loud amidst their congregations. I mean, what was their response? Instead, what we do is, this means what's going to happen after this election. That's what we're going to find out in the book of Revelations. What's going to happen? Where does Donald Trump fit into this? And I mean, I've been around long enough that, man, I've seen Arnold Schwarzenegger be the Antichrist, Barack Obama, Bill Clinton, Bush, Prince Charles, both of his sons, all of them. I mean, it's always somebody, you know, Bill Gates. It's always somebody right now. I mean, they've been saying this stuff since Hitler. I'm sure that whenever the futurist interpretation really took off, they were saying it about everyone they could find, and everybody seems to fit the bill until they don't, and it just they move on to someone else. And so I think, this is again my personal opinion, I think we get to those places because we're not looking at historical context. And so back to the beasts representing the kingdoms, and if I throw out the notion that the last beast and the last part of that statue is to represent a kingdom that's going to happen in sometime in the future, I have no idea when. But if I just throw that out for a second and say, okay, this must mean the Roman Empire, then I look at the beasts in Revelation 13, I get a completely different picture. And so I'm going to turn there because this is one that we're going to have to read too. This is one we can't just gloss over or summarize. Revelation 12 talks about the dragon, and it actually names the dragon like this is a symbolism of Satan. It actually says, the dragon, that old beast, Satan.
Yeah.
Right? But then it talks about in Revelation 13, it says, and I saw a beast rising out of the sea with 10 horns and 7 heads, with 10 diadems on its horns. Diadems are like crowns. It just means it's like a display, an ornamental display of power. On its horns and blasphemous names on its heads. And the beast that I saw was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. And to it the dragon gave his power. Now stop right there. Did you notice there's a chiastic structure in this too? Like a tracing back almost. I don't know if it's a full chiasm, but it's a tracing back, because when the beasts that we had in Daniel were first a lion, second a bear, third a leopard, and then a great terrifying beast with 10 horns. Then John goes backwards. He starts with the terrifying beast with 10 horns and 7 heads and 10 diadems on its horns. And then he said, and the beast was like a leopard. Its feet were like a bear's, and its mouth was like a lion's mouth. Now, why is he basically reverberating exactly? He's just rewinding the tape on Daniel. It's not a new beast he's coming up with. This is a beast collected with all of them. And he says he has 7 heads. Well, collectively, how many heads did the beasts have in Daniel? Well, the lion had 1 head. The leopard had 4 heads. So there's 5. The bear had 1 head, and then the great terrifying beast had 1 head, and that's 7 heads. Now, I've heard some different interpretations that the 7 heads is either the 7 hills of Rome or the 7 emperors of the Roman Empire up until Nero, and then the guy after Nero. But taking it for what it's worth, this is a beast that comes out of the sea, which the other beast came out of the sea too in Daniel. But this is a beast that comes out of the sea that John is seeing, and it is a representation of all the beasts that Daniel saw. And Daniel's beasts were about kingdoms. And so John is seeing a beast representing those beasts that represented kingdoms, if you can follow that whole train of thought. So that's the beast that comes out, and one of its heads seemed to have a mortal wound. Oh, it said the dragon gave him power and his throne and great authority. One of its heads seems to have a mortal wound, but its mortal wound was healed, and the whole earth marveled as they followed the beast. And they worshiped the dragon, which is Satan, for he had given his authority to the beast. And they worshiped the beast, which is now, I believe, this is my opinion, I believe it's the Roman Empire. I believe at this point right now it's the Roman Empire. I believe the collection of all the kingdoms is either a political spirit kind of thing, or it's a devouring of all the former kingdoms. It's a representation of he has conquered and claimed all the other kingdoms, and now this is him, the Roman Empire, empowered by Satan himself. They worship the dragon, for he gave him his authority, and they worship the beast, saying, who is like the beast, and who can fight against it? And the beast was given a mouth uttering haughty and blasphemous words, and it was allowed to exercise authority for 42 months. This stuff I have no idea what it means. It opened its mouth. I told you I was going to tell you. There's some stuff I have no idea what it means. Also, it was allowed to make war. And then you skip down past the part where, starting in verse 11, we see another beast show up. And so in verse 11 it says, then I saw another beast rising out of the earth. Now the other one was out of the sea. This one's out of the earth. It had 2 horns like a lamb, and it spoke like a dragon. It exercises all the authority that the first beast in its presence, and makes the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose mortal wound was healed. It performs great signs, even making fire come down from heaven to earth in front of people. And by the signs that it is allowed to work in the presence of the beast, it deceives those who dwell on the earth, telling them to make an image for the beast that was wounded by the sword and yet lived. And it was allowed to give breath to the image of the beast, so that the image of the beast might even speak, and might cause those who would not worship the image of the beast to be slain. And it causes all, both small and great, both rich and poor, both free and slave, to be marked on the right hand or the forehead, so that no one can buy or sell unless he has the mark, that is, the name of the beast or the number of its name. This calls for wisdom. Let the one who has an understanding calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man, and his number is 666. Now, I've gone back and forth on this, between this being allegorical, symbolic, or a literal thing. And I just want to give you some interesting things to consider, and you decide for yourself, okay? Because I've heard enough from teachers, and I can give you resources if you want, but I've heard enough from teachers to believe that this could possibly be Nero that they're talking about.
Right.
And I'll give you two examples of why I think this is possibly Nero. I don't know why there's a beast. I don't know why he would be represented by a beast. I do know that it is known, it is historical that his nickname was the Beast. He was a terrible, terrible person. I mean, he had his mother assassinated. He killed his pregnant wife by kicking her to death. He eventually killed himself at the age of 31, I think. I mean, he was just a wicked man, and he was very, very just tortured by demons, I think. But anyway, they called him the Beast. He used to light his garden on fire light torches of human Christians, light the garden as he would have dinner out in his garden that would be lit by the burning flesh of Christians. I mean, he was horrible. He set Rome on fire to burn it down, just to blame it on the Christians so that there could be persecution against the Christians. So there was a lot going on with this guy, and a lot to be feared, especially from John's churches who were up in the Turkey region, in Ephesus and Sardis and Thyatira and all that. Some interesting thoughts. Like, let's talk about the mark of the beast for a second.
Right.
So here's some interesting things. It says that you cannot buy or sell any goods unless you take his mark on your hand or your forehead, right? So the narrative that gets thrown out for the futurists is that there's going to be an antichrist figure. He's going to be a global leader, and he's going to institute maybe a microchip, maybe a barcode tattoo, maybe a vaccine. Now they're saying it's a vaccine, but I mean, we've heard everything, right?
Well, we know it's Elon Musk with his new brain thing.
I didn't even consider him. Wow. I forgot about that. I just saw that thing. That looks really, really interesting.
Yeah.
I forgot about that. Anyway, so we've always come up with, we see the devil in the details and everything, right? Mm-hmm. And we say, oh, there he is again. That's the mark of the beast. This is going to be a microchip, or now it's going to be this new COVID vaccine ID that we have to have with the infrared vaccine. I don't know. That's a whole other topic. But anyway. So let's talk about what this could mean. Well, if this is Nero, here's something that's really interesting. You ever heard the term agoraphobia? I'm sure you have.
Yes.
Agoraphobia. It comes from the Greek for agora, which meant a public place. The fear, agoraphobia it's multiple things, but mainly a fear of being in public or panicking in public. And it comes from agora, which was the Greek word for the marketplace or the public space marketplace. And while Nero was in power, he would have this marketplace called the agora. And he had instituted, I don't know if he did, I think Caesar Augustus instituted empirical worship, which meant you had to worship the emperor. And so they would have a statue of Emperor Nero at the beginning of the agora, and you would have to go give a sacrifice and worship to the statue of Nero. And you were only allowed in if you took ash from your sacrifice. You would put the ash on your right hand, or you would put on your forehead, like they do for Ash Wednesday in Catholic services. And that would be kind of like your passage to go into the market to buy and sell. So I don't know. I've read this in one place. I don't know the historic accuracy of it, but it would make a very condemning argument for Nero. Another one that kind of ties in with it is that his number 666 in gematria. Are you familiar with what gematria is? It was like
numerology almost, letters and
right, but it's like a code. Everything okay?
Yeah. Nikki's
scared for a second.
Nikki's peeking in here.
Hey, Nikki.
We're still live. So you're going to be on.
You can just say hey.
He said hey. Daniel said hey.
Hello?
It's weird calling you Daniel.
I know, it's fine. Yeah. I don't care what you call me. That's why I like to do the whole name, Daniel Cole Dodd. For anybody who's watching that doesn't know, I went by the name Cole for 30 years because that's my middle name. That's what everybody called me. But when my life was radically turned upside down, God spoke to me and said, I'm going to call you Daniel. But he spoke to me through another person who didn't know my first name was Daniel. And the guy was praying for me, and he was saying, I was crying. I was going through a really hard time. And he said, I don't know why God's telling me this, but he's saying, I'm going to call you Daniel. And he thought he was referring to the biblical prophet Daniel. And he's like, I guess it means, you're going to have prophecy coming out of you or whatever. And I was like, no, that's my first name. He's like, oh, he's calling you Daniel. And okay, so let me give you the backstory.
Sorry.
No,
Sidetrack.
It's cool. It's cool. This is the Matt Glover experience. So we're just chit-chatting.
Right.
So when I was 9 years old, first of all, I didn't grow up like knowing my dad very well. I got to see him every once in a while, but he didn't raise me. And my grandfather taught me a lot of things about manhood. Like taught me how to drive a truck. He taught me how to work on cars. He taught me how to fight. He taught me how to do like the brute stuff. Right. When I was 9, he had this 47 Chevy, red Chevy out in the garage, and he said it was all rusted up. And he said, if you sand it up with me and you start working on it with me, I'll give it to you when you turn 16. It was a red truck. And so I was like so excited at the age of 9. He taught me how to sand it. I was out there sanding it for hours. Came back like a week later after I went to go see my real dad. I came back, he had sold the truck right out from under me. Then when I was 13 or 14, my dad had a red Dodge truck, and I was sitting in the truck with him. We were sitting outside the Strawberry Festival, and I said, when I start learning to drive, I want to try to drive this because it was stick shift. And he's like, well, when you turn 16, son, I'm going to give you this truck. And it was a red truck. And so I'm like, great. So I turned 16. I told my mom, who I lived with, I said, my dad said he's going to give me his truck when I turn 16. So when I was about to turn 16, she calls me. She says, hey, Cole says that you're going to give him your truck. He said, I never told Cole I would give him this truck. I told him I would help him co-sign for a car. And she said, well, Cole, he says he didn't tell you that. And I said, yeah, he did. He did tell me he was going to give me the truck, but it's fine, whatever. And she's like, well, do you want his truck? Do you want him to co-sign for you? I said, no, it's fine. And then we got a different car. So then, so this guy's praying for me. I'm not going to tell you who he is because you would probably know him. This guy's praying for me, and he doesn't know my first name is Daniel. And he said, I don't know why, but God's calling you Daniel. And he says, I'm going to teach you what it means to be a son because you don't know what it means to be a son. Mm-hmm. Like, all right, that's cool. You didn't know my name, but that's pretty wild. So this must be God. And then he says, I don't know why, but he's telling me he's going to give you a red truck. And I was like, I had no idea what he was talking about. I was like, not even registering, brother. I have no idea. That's cuckoo. And he's like, I don't know. And he starts laughing. He's like, I'm going to pray more. And they just keep praying. And he starts praying. He's like, okay. He says that your dad said he was going to give you a red truck and he never gave it to you. And I was like, oh, I just fell out. Like, what? What are you talking about? And so that moment was so significant that this was not only a season I'm about to go into that's going to be really hard, but I'm going to learn what it means to be a son because I have no idea what it means to be a son. It's probably why I'm such a horrible person when I was 30 years old. Which I was a horrible person. If I was ever horrible to you, I'm sorry. I had no idea what I was doing.
Not to me, man. You were a
okay,
cool cat
great.
to me.
Great. We're all clear. We're all clear. I was horrible to a lot of people though. So it was kind of like significant. Like, okay, this is the path that I'm on now. I'm Daniel. I'm learning what it means to be a son because I have no idea. And through learning how to be a son, I became a better husband and I became a better father. And I believe I became a better pastor. I'm not in that arena yet, but I believe I will be one day. I have no idea when. I'm not really forcing the issue. So anyway, that's the nutshell story of why I don't go by Cole anymore. But when I go back to Florida, when I visit every summer, everybody calls me Cole. I don't care. Like, it doesn't bother me at all. Like, you call me Cole, it's because it was my name. It is still my name. Like, you can call me Cole. I will respond. I'm not going to get all uptight about who's that guy. He's dead.
That guy. Don't talk about that guy.
That butthead. But anyway, so I forgot completely what we were talking about. Oh, we were talking about the mark of the beast.
Right.
Let me try to think. There was another. Oh, the gematria. We were talking about gematria. So gematria is like a coded way of you write out numbers and they can spell certain things. And it's like in the Hebrew alphabet. I think they used Hebrew. I can't remember if they used Hebrew or Greek. I think it might have been Greek actually. In the Greek alphabet, that the letters would have certain numbers. assigned to them. Like alpha was 1, beta was 2, and so on and so forth. Is gamma third? Gamma, is that third?
If you would have went Hebrew, I'd have been able to tell you. But
right, yeah, I know you study Hebrew, yeah. So in Greek, when you get to a certain letter, then it becomes like 100, and then 200, and then 300, and 400, and so on and so on. And so you can take the number 666, and in gematria, it can spell a ton of things. Like it spells Billie Eilish in gematria. I don't know if you know that.
No.
Now you do. It also spells out Barack Hussein Obama. It also spells out somebody else who would have been like an antichrist kind of figure. Anyway, but it spells out Nero. So the interesting thing about this is if you look in your footnotes, like go to Revelation 13 and look in your footnotes for that verse and see if it says that some manuscripts say 616.
Yeah, so NET, it says a few manuscripts read 616 here, and several other witnesses have other variations. Irenaeus mentions a manuscript that has 616 is balanced by his rejection of such witness. In this case, as intriguing as the reading 616 is, since the conversion of Nero Caesar's name in Latin by way of gematria would come out as to 616, it must remain suspect because such a reading seems motivated in that it conforms more neatly to Nero's gematria.
So yeah, that basically says close to what I was going to say. So in the Asia Minor area of the Roman Empire, they had accents. You know how certain areas have accents and they have writings. You know, in the South we say things different than you do out here in Northern California. Trust me. Mm-hmm. Boston sounds completely different. They say things that mean a totally different thing. Minnesota, they don't call soda, they call it pop. You know these kind of things, right? Well, in Asia Minor, they had language differences as well. And one of those was they didn't call Nero, they called him Neron. And in the gematria, the manuscripts that were in that area said 616, which don't spell out Nero, they spell out Neron. But the ones that were more down towards Antioch and Alexandria, the manuscript that showed up there for Revelation showed up 666, which spelled their version of Nero. So it was, if Nero is the guy, then another evidence would be that the gematria and the mark of the beast number is showing up according to the way they pronounce his name, which is very interesting for me.
Yeah, in this book, the 4 views of Revelation, because I don't know if you saw me going like this, because I'm trying to pay attention, but I'm also trying to just find nuggets that we're loosely talking about, because both of us aren't super familiar with this.
Right. We're learning.
So in the 4 views of Revelation, you have since we're both kind of in the preterist camp, and that's kind of what we're talking about, because I do feel like the futurist camp is just so, the current market, I guess you would say, is so saturated with that. I don't feel like we need to go into that one. So we'll stick to the preterist one. But here it says, for the preterist view on the number 666, it says, one of the major evidences for identifying the beast with Nero is this information about the number of his name. Verse 17. John obviously did not expect his readers who had understanding, verse 18, to have any difficulty in identifying the beast, since they could simply calculate the meaning of this cryptogram. Here, using English characters, the Hebrew form of Caesar Nero is pronounced Neron Kaiser. The value of the 7 Hebrew letters is 50, 200, 6, 50, 100, 60, and 200, respectively.
So total is Hebrew, it's not Greek, right?
That's what this is saying. Yeah, that's what this is saying in the Hebrew. It says this is the solution advocated, or the total is thus 666. This is the solution advocated by David S. Clark, J. Adams, Kenneth Gentry, David Chilton, and most others. And then I'm just going to keep reading because it's a really short section. Most likely, the code utilized the Hebrew form rather than the Greek or Latin form of the name to avoid detection from Roman authorities, who would know both Latin and Greek, but not Hebrew. The readers of the book, however, knew considerable Hebrew, judging from the many symbols taken from the Old Testament, and also John's use of Hebrew words like Armageddon, Amen, hallelujah, Satan, a Hebrew name used in addition to the Greek word for devil, and Abaddon in addition to its Greek counterpart, Apollyon. The Hebrew language has exerted so great an influence over the writing of Revelation, in fact, that some scholars have been speculated that John originally wrote it in Aramaic, his native tongue, and a cognate of Hebrew. So that's interesting.
That's great. That's great information. I love that book. What is that, a newer book? Because it mentions Ken Gentry.
No, well, hold on a second. What do you mean by newer? I guess that's the.
I mean, like, Ken's still alive.
Yeah, 97 is when this was reprinted.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, but the original of this, it's got a lot, but this is by Steve Gregg, or edited by Steve Gregg, but it's the. I don't have the original cover, but it's just the Revelation, the 4 views, a parallel commentary, and it literally it parallels everything. So like you have,
I love that.
Yeah, and it literally just goes through. Like right now, I'm in the section, Revelation 13, 11 through 15.
I'm gonna look that up. I'm gonna order that on Amazon.
Yeah,
I love that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that's what the professor I had in Baptist College of Florida, he just gave it to me. He's like, here you go. He literally gave me a stack of books like this. I was like, this is like $500 worth of books. And he was like, yeah, I've got plenty of them. You can go ahead and take it. And I was like, all right. And I've had it ever since.
I think if you're gonna get to that point though, where you're gonna say, is this Nero? You have to look at the whole book of Revelation, because one of the hangups about Revelation is the dating of the writing. Because if the most popular opinion is that he wrote it in 96 or 97 AD, which would have put him in his 90s when he wrote it. But if he wrote it in the 90s, this is not referring to the destruction of Jerusalem, because in the preterist view, the whole letter of Revelation after chapter 4 on is a warning to the church, in conjunction with the warnings that Jesus gave at the Olivet Discourse, that the siege of Jerusalem is coming, the changing of the guard, so to speak, from the old age to the new age, the messianic age is about to come in, and it's going to come with the way that he said. And we can another time we can get into like why it had to happen this way, why the wrath of God was poured out this way. Right. But if we look at in the preterist view, this is a warning to the church that this is about to come. But if it was written in 96 AD, it could not have been a warning, because that's 26 years later after the fact. And so there's evidence on both sides, and this is for another day too, but there's evidence on both sides of why it was written in 96 and why it was written in 67.
Yeah. I actually watched a video not too long ago. And when I say I watched a video, most of the time when I watch videos, I put it on in my car and listen to it like a podcast.
Yeah, I do that too. I love that.
But it was, hold on, I want to find it really quick so I can mention it by name so people can look for it. It was, I know I watched it. Oh, here it is. So Allie Beth Stuckey, she is I don't know the name of her show or whatever, but she's on the Blaze. So she's on,
I love Blaze.
What's that guy's name? His network. It's his network.
Chad?
No, the Mormon guy.
Oh, I don't know.
Oh, my name is
Wretched.
No. But she's on his network, but this is her YouTube channel, and she Stuckey, Allie Beth Stuckey. Allie is Allie. Stuckey is Stuckey.
Got it.
And she interviews Jeff Durbin. And I didn't know this, but Jeff Durbin's a post-millennialist.
Okay.
And so she actually does there's 2 parts of it, and both of them are about an hour or so. And she talks about the end times, and he actually mentions all the stuff about Nero you were talking about. He's a lot more eloquent at this topic than we are.
A lot of people are.
yeah. But again, like what you're saying at the beginning, like we're learning, and so this is more of a conversation between 2 people who are trying to figure it out. And at least just going through their observations and not really having a certain applicable nature
And
for it.
I got nothing to prove. Like, I think there's more gained when we can say, I have no idea. Let's learn together, than to try to look like I've got all my crap figured out. Like, I don't want to come on here pretentiously and be like, oh, let me tell you what the Bible says. I'm learning, man. I have no idea.
Yeah, definitely. But one thing that Jeff does talk about when he's talking about the 70 AD and he actually talks about the dating of Revelation, and he mentions 3 or 4 points to why he believes that the dating of Revelation is actually 68 or 60 or 68 or 69 AD. And one of his things. Well, one of it was that Nero actually. So the disciple John, the disciple who Jesus loved, who wrote John, was actually dipped in oil by Nero, and he didn't die. And they said that freaked Nero out, and that's when he sent him to Patmos. It freaked him out. He sent him to Patmos, but he sent him to Patmos in that time frame of 67, 68 AD, and so that would make more sense that he would write that then.
I think that Josephus refers to that. Either Josephus or Jerome, one of the two, they write about that. Like, or maybe it was Tertullian. Somebody had written about how he was out there. He had gotten exiled by Nero. Yeah. Oh, it was Irenaeus. No, I don't know. It doesn't matter. But somebody had written
one of those 4 names.
One of those 4 I just threw out to sound eloquent in my attempt. Yeah. Somebody wrote. So one of the historians, one of the classic historians, wrote that he had been exiled by Nero. I never heard that. I mean, I knew he had got dipped in oil. I had never heard that it freaked Nero out. That's pretty funny.
Yeah, well, I don't know if that's what was written. I just know that's how Jeff Durbin put it, and I thought that was
funny.
I didn't think it was funny. I was like, man, that makes a lot of sense. Like, to me, I was like, man, that just for me, I'm like, man, that just gives so much validity to this view of the destruction of the temple in 70 AD, and it just makes so much sense. And I think just from these 3 episodes, this one included, just from these 3 to paint this end times view, it's for me, it gives more hope, because and Jeff Durbin said this too in his interview, and I would totally recommend anybody to go watch it. But he said, that he believes the church is in its infancy right now, and that he believes it's going to just keep growing from here. So that gives hope. And things look dull, but it always looks that way, even from the biblical perspective. Even when things go good, they have that cyclical nature of going bad and then going good.
There's an ebb and flow for sure. I mean, right now, look at things were really great. Just last year, things were really great. We had a great economy. Yeah. Is there always bad stuff going on? Of course, there's always bad stuff going on, but the kingdom is still growing. And I think right now, even though that a lot of churches are shut down, the kingdom is still growing. I know that I'm watching. If you ever heard of Sean Feucht's going out and he is like holding outside worship events in Seattle and Portland and Chicago and Boston and New York City, and it's like taking over. Like, people are going out in the streets and worshiping. And it's like revivals happening in those kind of areas. And I love that kind of stuff amidst all the turmoil. But and to your point, in a premillennial view, when you expect evil to prevail, you allow it to prevail, because it's supposed to get bad so that Jesus can come back. And on top of that, your evangelism becomes very fear induced, very fear infused, I should say, because it's more like, let me tell you about how horrible hell is and how bad it's going to be if you don't come to know Jesus. That's like a mafia tactic. Let me just scare you into the kingdom. Whereas a postmillennial view, you really have no other choice but to say, there's a loving Father who has been disconnected from you and desperately wants to be reconnected to you, but he is leaving the choice up to you. That speaks much more volumes to me when I feel like I'm not valued. If I'm a person who needs to know that I'm valued by God, when I feel like nobody cares about me, when the world turned their back on me, but you're telling me that my Father in heaven, the God of the universe, wants to connect with me, but is giving me the choice, that's huge. As opposed to, everyone tells you that you're worthless. God actually thinks you're worthless too, but you better get to know him or you're going to be left without him. Oh, okay. That sounds like a good deal, I think.
Right. Yeah. Um, One of the things, and just to at least start our descent, um, one of the things I think at least partial preterism and postmillennialist view does for us too is it kind of because I felt like when I did, I don't know if I ever had that premillennial view. I just was always taught it,
Right.
before I went to college. And so I always had that view of like, oh man, we're waiting for we're waiting for the
The
nation
third
of
temple.
Israel. We're waiting for that third temple. As
Yep.
soon as that third temple starts to get built, and that's the big thing. That's the big thing that everybody's waiting on. But then, especially with the last two episodes, um, that I did is just you kind of shed that weight off, and you're like, we're not waiting for that anymore because it happened. It happened a long time ago. So
Right.
what are we waiting for now? We're waiting for Jesus to come back, and we're not waiting for Jesus to take his throne because he's already done that.
Right.
You know, and
And
and one thing that that my buddy Ken tells me, or he says, that with this point of view, we can literally go out and say, hey, let me tell you something. Jesus is king. He's
Mhm.
king now. And let me tell you a little bit about that. And that's where we start sharing the gospel instead of, hey, you're going to hell and
Right.
Jesus is going to come back
Right.
and you're going to have to take with the Antichrist and you're going to not want to take the mark of the beast. It's like, no, Jesus is king now.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Jesus is king now.
It gives us a
Uh,
lot of, like you said, it gives us a lot of hope. And when you realize that you can start doing good, and you're not going to be affecting the cause, so to speak. Because if you, in a premillennial mindset, if you do good, it's either out of obligation or you have good intentions, but you kind of have this thing in the back of your mind, like, I don't want the world to get better because it's supposed to get bad before Jesus comes back. And so,
right.
in a kingdom mindset where the kingdom is growing, the postmillennial view that it's growing, I want to help as many people come to know a loving Father. I want them to be reconnected, like I said. And you're absolutely right. You don't have to start with, let me ask you this: if you died today, do you know where you would be going? Like, let's start with relationship. Let's start
Mhm.
with a God. Why? How better to introduce a God that's all about relationships than building relationships instead of starting with fear? Like, do you know that without Jesus you'd go to hell? Like, yeah, I get your point, but
Yeah,
this is
yeah. Well, I mean, just imagine because I mean, the whole evangelism,
yeah,
the whole word for gospel came from just the declaration that
you're a
the
new
herald,
creation.
yeah, the declaration the heralds would make in Rome. They would say, hey, hey, everybody, good news, Caesar just conquered this new land for you guys.
Yeah,
Look how great Caesar is, and so the disciples are literally copying that model.
yeah.
Imagine if they would have went out and instead of like, hey, guys, you're going to hell. Hey
You know,
guys,
and
it's
and something, I know we're trying to land the plane a little bit, but
yeah.
something about, just so you understand the mindset of the apostles. Like, why did they start calling themselves apostles? Like, Jesus didn't call them apostles; they started calling themselves apostles.
Mhm.
Why did they all of a sudden adopt this Greek word apostles, or this Latin word adapted by the Greeks? Why did they pull that in there? Because the word apostle comes from apostolos. In the Roman Empire, what they would do is when they would conquer a new land, they would send an apostle, an apostolos, over to that land to, let's say they conquered Libya, and they would want to change the roads to look like Rome. They would want to change the education system, the culture, the draperies in the houses, the food, the everything. They wanted everything to be changed in that culture to look like Rome, so that whenever the emperor would visit Libya, the new liberated Libya, he could step off the boat and say, "Ah, this feels like home." And so, why would the disciples call themselves apostles if we've diminished it to just being the ones who actually saw Jesus, or the ones who were entrusted to do miracles? Well, there were plenty of other people that could do miracles besides the apostles, but that's besides the point. But these guys, they knew it was their vision to make the culture of earth look like the culture of heaven, because the kingdom is growing, and the king of that kingdom just means king's domain. The king is coming back, and when he gets back, we want him to step off the boat, so to speak, and say, "Ah, this feels like home." because our job, and this is, I know you had referenced how Bethel is very much heaven to earth now. That's the mindset of an apostle. An apostle's mindset was, how can I make this look like cultural wise? Obviously we're not going to have streets of gold, but how can I make this culture wise, mindset wise, look and feel like heaven, where there's fruit of the Spirit flowing, not fruit of the wine. Anyway.
Right. Yeah. It's funny that you say fruit of the not fruit of the wine, because my life group that I'm in, we just finished Genesis after like months of reading Genesis. But at the end, yeah, we're going piece by piece. I think we're doing like a chapter or two at a time, but we only meet like twice a month. Yeah. And at the end of that, and this has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I just thought it was funny that you said not wine. But at the end of it, when Israel is blessing his sons, he says to Judah, he says, said something about, and your, hold on, let me look it up really quick. But like your eyes will be red or something like that with wine. And we were. Yeah, and that's the thing. We were all kind of like, "What does that mean? Like, what is he talking about?"
Judah, I bless you. You will always be wasted.
Yeah, here it goes. It goes. His eyes are darker than wine, and his teeth are whiter than milk. And so it's like, what does that mean? And to me, it sounded derogatory, because it's like, oh man, he's gonna be drunk all the time. But I looked it up in the NET, and the footnotes in the NET said that it is actually when a land is, because white teeth was associated with milk, with a lot of milk, like an overabundance of milk, and red eyes were associated with an overabundance of wine, so an overabundance of fruit. And so it was a blessing for Judah to say that your eyes are going to be red, full of wine, and your teeth are going to be white, like milk. And so I thought it was just interesting. So I just want to read this, because this is really a point that Kenneth Gentry makes in the book of Revelation Made Easy. The first point he makes right out of the gate is this. And it's in Revelation chapter 1, verse 1. It says, "The revelation of Jesus Christ, which God gave him to show his servants what must happen very soon." And then in verse 3, it says, "Blessed is the one who reads the words of this prophecy aloud, and blessed are those who hear and obey the things written in it, because the time is near." And then I can't remember where else it is in here, or actually it's actually in here. And then Revelation 22:10, it says, "And he said to me, do not seal up the words of the prophecy of this book, for the time is near." And one thing that Kenneth Gentry does is he actually, and I think just like what you were saying and what this conversation was supposed to be, was that if you want to understand Revelation, even the beasts, you need to understand Daniel, because John pulls a lot from Daniel, and even those words, because in Daniel 12 verse 4 it says, "But as for you, Daniel, conceal these words and seal up the book until the end of time."
I'm glad you brought that up, because I was going to bring that up and I forgot.
Yeah.
Daniel was told to seal it up. John opens it.
Yeah. And again, you just see the parallels throughout the entire book of Daniel with the book of Revelation. And so why would we think that it's anything but, an event for those people that lived in John's day? Why would we think that?
Which it still has a blessing for us today, 2,000 years later.
Absolutely.
It doesn't mean it's irrelevant to us. And if that's a fear, then you need to throw that out. Like, it doesn't mean that it has no point of relevance for us now. It still has tons of stuff.
Right. Well, because as a post-millennialist, we still look forward to the second coming. Yeah. Jesus is still coming. The New Jerusalem is still coming. Yeah. But what we have to hope for is that now, instead of fighting the clock, instead of fighting this clock that's counting down, and we've got to save as many people as we can, we can know and have confidence that, man, this is just the beginning, and the kingdom is just going to grow and spread until Jesus finally is like, all right, that's enough. Like now we have enough people to be a part of this kingdom.
Right.
And I just think that's a much more optimistic point of view.
Sure. Sounds more like a loving father to me.
Right. Yeah, definitely. So with that, I think it's good for us to wrap it up. Nobody asked any questions, but I think I don't think
Is anybody watching? I
don't know. I get more views on Facebook than I do YouTube and Twitch. I did post the YouTube link in Facebook and like, hey guys, I'm having a problem with Facebook. Please go to YouTube and watch. But I know a lot of people who actually have been listening and watching like after the fact, and so it's cool.
I was just wondering. So
one day we'll build up that audience where we'll actually have questions that we can answer.
Well, I really appreciate you having me on here. It was an honor. And I love your heart. I love your heart to know truth in the Bible.
Yeah, same with you, man. Same with you. I appreciate I appreciate you coming to my life and still being a really good friend for me. So stick around for a minute. I'll do my close, and then we'll have our after chat.
Okay.
All right. So everybody, I hope you enjoyed this episode of mattnews.biz and this interview with Daniel Cole Dodd. You can rewatch this stream on my YouTube page. The link is in the bio if you're on Facebook, and it's also in the link in the bio if you're on Instagram, but you're not watching this from Instagram because I don't stream to Instagram. But the link is in the bio for YouTube. You can rewatch the stream there, or you can listen to my podcast, which I know for a fact is available on Google Podcast and Apple Podcast. Next week, I'm going to be chatting with apologist Stephen Robles about why people fall away and how can we defend our faith. I hope to see you next time as we explore more Matt News.